I think we should make a start. It's really good to see everybody. And I'm just going to say a few preliminary words. Our planet is enduring climate and biodiversity catastrophes at an accelerating rate. Interrupting, limiting, slowing environmental breakdown have to be the overarching policy imperatives for governments. And doing this in ways that reduce rather than exacerbate inequalities and oppression has to be the priority for organizations like JVL that claim to side with the oppressed. Not everyone on the left recognizes the pivotal role environmental action must play. We're creatures of habit, culture, and ideology. So even in the midst of the sixth mass extinction of life on Earth, the priorities that trip most easily off the tongues and keyboards of comrades may emphasize the ending of fuel and food poverty, improving working conditions, building homes, repairing the NHS and social care, extending public ownership, and may omit the addressing of looming environmental catastrophe. It's my task as environment officer in JVL to try to persuade increasing numbers of JVL comrades to integrate such programs within the imperative of environmental action. It's not easy to face up to what is happening. It is scary. 70% loss of mammals, reptiles, amphibians, insects in the last 50 years. Deteriorating soil conditions from intensive farming and the use of pesticides and herbicides. And rapidly rising global temperatures from the burning of fossil fuels, which will be exacerbated at some point next year as the El Niño effect kicks in. It involves facing our own mortality, multiplied many times as we consider the impact on future generations, the young darlings in our own families and those in every other family around the world. Facing up to the destruction of life on Earth involves going through a portal. It separates you, to an extent, from those who have not made the shift. You know that recognizing accelerating environmental catastrophe changes everything. You know when others have not done it because their priorities remain the same. I've searched for suitable analogies with the levels of denial preventing people from contemplating environmental breakdown. I recently reread Arthur Miller's Breaking Glass. It addresses the way New York Jews both knew and hid from themselves the looming catastrophe for Jews in Europe, leading up to Kristallnacht. I also thought about Satyajit Ray's wonderful film, Distant Thunder, depicting life in Bengal as the warplanes in World War II action thunder overhead, and the Great Famine of 1943, which killed more than 3 million Bengalis, gets ever closer and impactful. In both cases, there are those who know and those that refuse to know, and there is an inconvenient truth. So how should we respond to impending environmental catastrophe? Let's think this through together. We have a series of short talks interspersed with discussion. We're going to start with Averil Parkinson, who will talk about her journeys into activism with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and then recently with the Just Stop Oil Coalition. After some discussion, Julian Williams will introduce the ideas of Andreas Malm, as well as his own view on effective strategies for environmental action. And then Sohrab Rezvani, an Iranian PhD student working with Julian, will share his view of protest as a revolutionary socialist. And the final contribution will be me again, if there's time, and I'll describe my activism and the form that it takes. So over to you now, Averil. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, I'm Averil. I live in Cambridge. I was first made aware of the Just Stop Oil activities through the Jeremy Corbyn's Peace and Justice project. In the summer, fairly closely after those very hot days in July, I had an email and there was a Zoom meeting attended by about 3,000 people, and it was announcing the sort of joint working between Peace and Justice and Just Stop Oil. I was particularly struck by the fact that it's quite a broad coalition, not just those two groups, but old friends of ours, CND, Stop the War, Fuel Poverty Action, XR Trade Unionists, DPAC, which is Disabled People Against the Cuts, People's Assembly, Operation Black Vote, and some others. I was thinking that for us, working coalition and mutually support was a good thing, and that's what we should be doing these days. And the action that was being put forward was for a rolling daily action in London in October, at least every day in October. And this, to me, it's something a bit further than like just going on a march, to something for one day. And, you go home again and nothing happens. So the consistency, the idea of the consistency struck me. And it's quite modest requirements, although it's direct action and you run the risk of being arrested. Basically, it's just sitting down and not getting up too quickly. We noticed in going to one of the early actions in October, on October the 2nd on Waterloo Bridge, where it was optional to sit down in the road. There were a large number of people, but particularly there were older people choosing to risk arrest. Several of them with sticks or needing to sit on a chair. It's something, and I've noticed this in one of the organising Zoom meetings, that some older people felt this was something that they could quite easily do, and also we've got less to lose. From the Waterloo Bridge example, I found that quite encouraging, and it was quite a moving experience. People either stood and watched people being arrested and clapped and cheered them, or sat down themselves. And Waterloo Bridge was clear of traffic and they took their time. There seemed to be no hurry from the police to get the traffic moving again. So I hadn't actually realised that when we did it for real on one of the days in October, I would actually be quite near traffic. Our day on October the 6th was on Northumberland Avenue, which just leads out of Trafalgar Square. It was all fairly straightforward. The disruption didn't last enormous amount of time. There was an arrest and we were taken to Islington Police Station. I was only in there for 4 hours. It was a fairly, not a scary experience, although it varies and it can be difficult for some people. It was a low level, low risk action, although it did include being arrested. One of the reasons being to put a bit of pressure on the system, on the police system, the legal system, and make some mark in that way. In terms of going back to the coalition reasoning, I've noted many progressive left groups do have complementary or overlapping remits, and groups are joining together more. I think we need to be more aware of what each other are doing and not just fixed in our own silos. My history is over 20 years or so is advocating for and campaigning for Palestine. I haven't done anything that would qualify as risky direct action, although I did go in with a group to a bank, I think it was HSBC, to talk to them. But we should be aware of each other, give each other mutual support where we can. It doesn't mean we necessarily change all the things we do. We have to do division of labour. One thing we have got in the world is lots of people. If lots of people can do something, then that must be to the good. I'd noticed earlier in the summer, I'd been to a boycott network meeting to do with Palestine. And I did try to tell people that, look, we're planning, and there were plans going on for a Barclays campaign on Barclays Bank to do with their investments. I think that was planned for the 1st of October, or there may have been one on another day. But the 1st of October was also the first day of this Just Stop Oil action in London. And we should think about that. You know, do we want to mutually support? Do we not? If we want a lot of publicity for one action and you know something else is going on that it should garner a lot of publicity, you know, we don't want to clash. And I think on that day also, on the 1st of October, it was the Enough is Enough, one of the first Enough is Enough rallies. And with Barclays, actually, there's also an obvious opportunity for collaboration because both Palestine activity and climate action can have got calls to make on Barclays Bank. The next point I'd like to make is that is on timing. Timing of what we do. The climate crisis is extremely urgent and there is no scope for negotiation. We do need to take this on board. You know, there's what I would say is the big scientific equation in the sky is not going to give us extra time. And this ought to, if we're doing other activities, working on other campaigns, we need to bear this in mind. And for the broad political change that we're all working towards in various ways, this puts an extra pressure on the timescales that we need to be aware of. We haven't got the luxury of some of the timescales that perhaps people would have thought about in the past. On the left, ever since the end of 2019, we've had sort of 3 years of wonderful argument and lots of discussion and trying to get our heads around exactly what is going on politically. But at some point, we do need to firm that up into joint action. Final point I'd like to make on with climate action and some of the formats that forms it's taken, it does go on a lot of criticism. You know, you shouldn't do it like this, you shouldn't do it like that. I agree with what you're saying, but I don't agree with your actions. And that does compare frequently with the sorts of things that are said for actions for Palestine, in criticising Palestinians in terms of how they might respond to the enormity of what's continually done to them. But I think we should take that back to the critic, because at the moment it's an unprecedented situation. We're in uncharted territory. We don't know what will work best and what won't. We know what hasn't worked. We know all the things we've done before that may not have worked. So we've got to be creative. We've got to try things. And if any one of the critics generally don't say what you can do, so we should put it back to them and say, well, yes, this may or may not work. We don't know yet, but what would you suggest? A really good example in terms of publicity in this area, the young activist Phoebe Plummer, who was the person who was filmed the incident of throwing the tomato soup at the Van Gogh sunflowers. She had an interview with Newsnight on the 2nd of November. You can find it on YouTube. She gave a superb interview, 6 minutes, and she did bring it back. You can imagine the sorts of questions she got asked. She got interviewed very fairly, actually, by Victoria Derbyshire, but she did push it back on the interviewer, and it's a very good and interesting example of how that can be done. I would say, in relation to my experience and to what Tony earlier said about it was going through the portal, it did induce some anxiety in preparing for the action, and that anxiety level stayed as my awareness in going through this, my awareness of the enormity of the issue became more apparent to me. I think previously I'd thought, well, I'm keeping an eye on this. Well, yes, we've got to sort things out by 2050. Oh no, hang on a minute, it's 2030. Oh no, actually it's now.
Thank you very much, Averil. You express the urgency for action extremely clearly. I have Keir Starmer's little take on protest if you would like to see that, but maybe you all saw it. Did anyone not see it?
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay,
No,
well, I'll try and share it with you. Hold on.
Get up, go home. I'm opposed to what you're doing. It's not the way to deal with the climate crisis. And that's why we wanted longer sentences for those that are gluing themselves and stuck on roads. I think of all the people trying to get to work today. I'm here at Imperial College. We've got fantastic young scientists who are dealing with carbon capture. This sort of thing will actually help us solve the climate crisis. And it's people working on projects like this who can't get to where they need to be because other people are gluing themselves to the road. So I'm afraid I'll be I think they're totally wrong. Get up, go home.
I wish he'd get up and go.
Well, Keir Starmer is grasping at the possibility that carbon capture and storage can provide a solution to the present crisis, an activity that an eminent Cambridge professor has described as magic beans fertilized by unicorn's blood, and is unlikely to contribute much in the next very few years when we need dramatic reduction in the use of fossil fuel. We're looking forward to hearing from you now, Julian.
I'll try and be really brief. This discussion is very interesting, and maybe I'll move it a little bit. I feel very sympathetic, actually, to a lot of the things that have been said. I hope that'll become clear. So I invited you to have a look at Malm, and particularly the review of Andreas Malm's work that Terry Wrigley and I wrote and has been posted on YouTube. I put my notes for this talk up in the chat, and I'll put it up again in case anybody came late and doesn't get access. And so there's a link there. Andreas Malm, he's a revolutionary, radical communist, I suppose. And so, you know, I start by reading his work as a critic and an admirer. And he has written a number, well, we reviewed 3 books, and they're quite substantial books. But the book that Tony invited us to look at, which is How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and as he says jokingly, it's not a manual. But it's an invitation to consider what sorts of action might be needed now and in the future before the fossil capitalists destroy us. People were talking about Stop Oil protesters being articulate, and there was a young woman on Radio 4 this morning confronting one of the very clever and articulate Radio 4 presenters. And, you know, I just felt that Radio 4 was, as usual, destroyed by a very articulate point of view. She was presented with somebody who couldn't get to hospital to visit a dying relative because of the gridlock that had been caused by Just Stop Oil. And the answer to this was that this is proportionate, that if we don't do something, that millions of people are going to die, which they are already, and billions of people are going to be displaced. Billions of people are going to be displaced. Yeah. We had a talk from Sohrab, who I hope is going to contribute next or later. The drought in Iran, just in that relatively small part of the Middle East and Africa that's suffering from this kind of climate change now, is likely to lead to 30 to 40 million people being displaced from their homes in Iran. So this is an immediate threat. There's no question about it. The review that I invited you to look at of Malm's 3 books, the key takeaways that I have in my notes are, firstly, that we shouldn't talk about the Anthropocene. They talk about the Capitalocene, i.e., it's not man, anthropos, humanity, which is causing the climate crisis. You know, anthropos has been around for tens of thousands of years. What's happened since Manchester and the Industrial Revolution is that fossil capital took over from other forms of energy production, including water power, wind power, etc. And it's coal and then oil and then gas and methane, which has progressively started to destroy the climate. So his first book, which was his thesis, I mean, by far the best book in my opinion, it's a wonderful piece of anthropology, is about how that happened in Manchester, just down the road from where I used to take my kids for a walk in the woods, Sile Mill. Beautiful place. This was the place that was going to water power industrialization through the big mill and all that there. And that was destroyed by fossil capitalists because fossil capitalists were able to control the working class through this means of moving the energy production of coal to the places where there was unemployment and they could deprive people of a living, etc. So this is all, from Marm's point of view, about the fight between the capitalist class and the poor that were coming off the land and becoming working class. His second book was much more philosophical, and it was an attack on post-Marxist, post-modernist points of view about how to fight this problem. And basically what the takeaway from the book is, the postmodernists are not about fighting capitalism. They're about publishing academic papers, and they have their own academic ways of reproducing their own cultural capital. And they're not really contributing anything much to the movement. So it's a kind of a bomb in the household, postmodernists and post-Marxists. And the third book is about the pandemic and how we got hundreds of thousands of people dying all over the globe, but we don't realize it's all part of the same eco-disaster that capital is inflicting all over the place with deforestation, etc. And it ends up with an extraordinary chapter about which goes to the topic tonight, about Lenin on war communism, where Lenin says shortly after the revolution in Russia, even if this had been a fascist right-wing takeover coup, they would have had the same problems to face, that there's a disaster happening and we communists are going to have to deal with it as best we can, which is poverty, invasion. The subject of the book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, is then really about tactics and how do we go about things. And he is very critical of reformist movements by Martin Luther King, Mandela, Gandhi, but critical in the best sense, that he understands that there is a peaceful side, a legal side, as well as an illegal and potentially violent side to resistance. So I think the conclusion, which I'm coming to, it's a sort of personal conclusion, but I think it's implicit in Marm's work, is that issues about legality and illegality, issues about violence and non-violence, any reaction to the situation that we're in is ethically completely justified. We shouldn't be arguing about whether it's justified or not. We shouldn't be arguing about whether we support the anti-fascists or the people that wanted to bump off Hitler, etc. That's not the argument. The only argument is about tactics. And so I want you to think about the tactics of opposition and how we engage everybody in this, everybody, the great mass of the population.
Okay.
So there are those who want to, and good on them, sitting in the streets and stopping the traffic. But what about getting imaginative and thinking about every school wanting to protect its playground from pollution? Let's have a fresh air for Fridays and block the traffic from poisoning our playgrounds. Or, you know, a Twitter campaign about Elon Musk, why don't you stay at home and work? Would have been good last week. Okay.
Thanks very much, Julian. Thank you. I wonder, Sohrab, if you would now say something about your perspective?
Yes, sure. First of all, yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me to your meeting. Thanks, JBL, Tony, Julian, and everybody else. Well, I will be very quick about the arguments that I'm trying to put forth. First of all, I definitely support all kinds of direct action. I think it's very important, it's necessary to promote direct actions in the struggle for environmental justice, in the struggle for social justice, or what other kinds of struggle that we have. But it seems to me that direct actions in all their forms, violent or non-violent direct actions, uh, they need to become sustainable in terms of being in a continuous way, having a presence in a continuous way. So I think we need to think about how is it possible to have, if you like, sustainable direct actions. And I think it would be possible if we integrate tactics of direct action with tactics of gaining self-control or self-management over local communities, over our neighborhoods, over local businesses, over micro industries that we have, over the supply chains of goods and services. I think it's impossible that we, for example, block a road for 1 or 2 days and then we come back to work in our companies and factories without having any kind of intervention in that areas, or coming back to our communities and neighborhoods without doing any kind of, other kind of activities and resistances in that areas. So I think direct action is not our only weapon. We need to think beyond direct action to complement direct action, let's say. But also we have another problem, I think, in the environmental movement, which is that what can we do with the big industries, with the industries that are operating on the national level or on the international level? How can we build tactics and strategies for struggling against these industries, and how we can gain control over these industries? That's why I think that we need to revolutionize the tradition of trade unionism or syndicalism in the Great Britain and other places. Even I think we need a bit of bureaucracy, a bit of radical politics and party politics, and a state intervention. But it seems that the environmental activists are not really into this kind of politics, which I think is not good. So I think we need to unlock the political strike, the solidarity strike. We need to unlock the possibility of environmental strike. I think there are some conditions, in some conditions, there is the possibility of going on an environmental strike in the workspaces, that we can think about it, I think. So my final thing is that that I want to say is about the situation in Iran. And specifically, I want to talk about the situation in Kurdistan, the west part of Iran. In that area, we are observing the emergence of neighborhood committees, strike committees, women's unions. The teachers' union are very powerful in that area. And revolutionary students' committees are developing not only in that area, but also on the national level. So it seems that in this moment, the social revolution in Iran have developed and created the institutions for self-management and local control over the neighborhood and small businesses, but still we have the problem and we don't see any perspective of a strong revolutionary party in Iran, or a strong, at least let's say, coordinating organ to work on a national level or international level. That's why I think we need, as Averil said, we need international justice. We need to, connect our struggle in Britain with the struggles that are happening in Iran and other places. And I think we should not forget, at my final sentence, that we should not forget that in terms of, for example, water stress level, in the Middle Eastern countries would experience it on the highest level. And those areas need the most solidarity from us. And maybe it can be part of our long-term strategic thinking to build international projects related to the population in that area, which are facing the, as Julian said, severe environmental situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sohrab. Thank you very much. I mean, I worked as an educator for 40 years, and it became clear to me as an educator that I had a duty of care to my students, which extended to trying to ensure that they would have an environment in the future which would support them to flourish. I summarized my contribution to the development of schools and education systems with two questions. How should we live together? And what do we need to know to live together well? I see environmental sustainability as an imperative within the framework of values that answers the first of these questions. How should we live together? An understanding of nature and our relationship to it became a critical part of the curriculum I designed to answer the second question. Subjects such as water, food, and energy replace traditional subject headings. But such environmental action had little influence outside of the lecture hall or my readership, and I became convinced of the need for more direct action, and was delighted when Extinction Rebellion brought together people of all ages who were willing to engage in non-violent direct action, to pressurize those with power, to end planet-destroying policies and activities. I blocked fossil fuel funding banks, and I blocked roads. I was in court for clearing the Intercontinental Hotel in Mayfair during the Oil and Money Conference of all the biggest polluters on the planet, the heads of polluting countries and the heads of polluting corporations. And in fact, the case against me, I actually set off the fire alarm, but the case against me was dismissed because the judge had no time for the Crown Prosecution Service, who accused me of being a liar, and the judge insisted that I was an honest man. We closed the centre of Cambridge for a day and replaced cars with a garden, music, sport, and leisure activities, from yoga to tennis. We called the action Streets for Life to show what life without cars in our cities could be like. And my environment activities remain varied. Sue and I are both in a group called Friends of the River Cam to highlight over-abstraction of water from and pollution of a dying river system, as well as the encroachment of unsustainable high emissions buildings and infrastructure. We clean up tributaries to the Cam. We campaigned against the regular illegal dumping of raw sewage into the river by Anglian Water. We replaced their slogan love every drop, with placards asking their customers to love every plop. We do what we can to expose the illegal carbon budget busting, biodiversity destroying high growth in our area. Cambridge, like other places in the south and east of the country, is in a gold rush because of the profits to be made from land sales and development. And the university here, Cambridge University, is among the most rapacious of developers and retains its investment in and funding from the oil industry.
Oh,
I've written leaflets calling out the university for caring for its own growth and profit and little for its duty to preserve a viable future for its students. It's part of the growth lobbying group called Cambridge Ahead, and I ask, in the end game, which we're in, to preserve life from environmental collapse, what's the role of universities? We're targeting the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership for its leadership in greenwashing and its failure in its 30 years of existence to lead on sustainability. At the opening of its new building, it played host to representatives of the oil, arms, and airline industries. One of its sponsors, Kering, a conglomerate of luxury fashion houses, proclaims luxury and sustainability are one and the same. We will be surrounding the building with tape in an action in a few weeks, proclaiming a climate crime scene. I made a small contribution to some of the protests coordinated by Just Stop Oil, hoping for the emergence of a true alliance of progressive groups, as Averil mentioned. I'll have a trial next February, charged with willful obstruction of the highway, and I'm pleading not guilty and asserting a necessity defense that I acted to prevent a greater harm. I'm convinced that necessity will be increasingly accepted as the impact of climate breakdown becomes more evident. About 1,000 excess deaths were associated with the one day when the temperature reached a record 40 degrees centigrade last summer. When temperatures peak at 45 degrees or more, perhaps in the UK, of course, they've gone above 50 in India and Pakistan, because next year's an El Nino year. Will environment defenders continue to be locked up for saying the glass is breaking and the storm is upon us? Antonio Guterres said last week at COP27, we're on a highway to climate hell. It's that highway that we will do our utmost to willfully obstruct. If sitting in a road in London or in Cambridge continues to gather publicity about the changes that are needed, or I find some other action, or I hear from my comrades that there's something better to be done in order to interrupt this slide to catastrophe after catastrophe, then, depending on my health and the level of my fear of incarceration, which I hate the prospect of, I will continue to play my small part. Thank you. I'm glad that somebody, was it you, Lucy, who reminded people that nobody threw soup at a Van Gogh painting. Soup was thrown at the glass covering a Van Gogh painting in the knowledge that no painting was going to be hurt during this operation. I mean, it's a real comment on our media that they report it in other ways, and to some extent a comment on our own mentality, that we get sucked into those ways of thinking.
There are a few points I wanted to make. I am totally in favour of direct action, and I think what Palestine Action do is justified on the basis that, and you'll probably know this, that some of them have been let off serious charges of criminal damage and so on on the basis what they're doing is to prevent a greater harm. Now, if that doesn't apply to what climate justice activists are trying to do, then I don't know what does. I mean, it obviously does. They also have a sort of anarchist perspective, which I found quite intriguing, not 100% convincing, but basically the idea that if the police are letting you do something, then you're obviously wasting your time, or they wouldn't let you do it. So so the idea that you should have demonstrations which you negotiate the route for with the local cops, and you chat to them on the way and all that kind of stuff. Palestine Action people don't want anything to do with that, and I sympathise. But you know, tactics. You know, you do what you think is necessary to give them time. The question that Sohrab raised about trade union action and you know, pressure on the state to take action is very important. And you're probably aware that the TUC, including Unite the Union, which is meant to be under militant leadership now, voted just recently to support increased defence spending because they see it as good for jobs. Now, with that kind of thinking, you're not going to get very far with trying to introduce policies that will revolutionise the way we generate energy and use it, and so on and so on. So there's work to be done there at political campaigning level.
Carol.
Yeah, I would say that what he said is typically a reaction for the politician who's defending the current situation, not willing to do any radical change, which we need. And you can find in history a lot of examples. I would say that the Russian Revolution died 101 years ago. The Kronstadt uprising was crushed by the Bolshevik government because they rebelled against betrayal of the revolution, and off we went to Igor Stalin. But I would also say the Gallup action, as said, makes sense and is effective, because if you look at the government introducing more harsh laws and meting out a bigger punishment, it quite seems that the government is afraid. And I know what I'm talking about. I used to live in Czechoslovakia, and I used to be dissident, and the reaction of communist government against the dissident was exactly the same. They were saying, oh no, we're not afraid, you are just a criminal, and you are revisionist, cosmopolitan, God knows what. So why they were acting, how they were acting? Because they were afraid. And in '89, they collapsed. And we can't give up because there's no other way. We have to do any legal means possible to fight for the change.
Legal and illegal.
Illegal, like blocking the road. But I guess there's also legal means. Sue the local council, sue the government, because the air which we breathe is poisoned. There was already the case with the girl who died because she lived close to South Circular Road.
Yeah.
And if you look at this, what air pollution you got, wherever you live, it's everywhere, practically everywhere, exceeding legal limits. So perhaps going, not only blocking road, but going to the court would be effective as well.
Thank you, Carol. Julian.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of things very quickly. There has been a debate that we referred to in our review about when the ruling class became destructive. And Jason Moore argues that it really started in the 17th century with deforestation. And there were huge tracts of land destroyed to give way to agriculture with monocultural crops and the like. So it's not quite as simple just to concentrate on Manchester and the the drive to coal and steam. There is a history of debate that, you know, between the 17th and the 19th century, really, when capitalism really got going. And the other thing was about tactics. Absolutely, the case studies that Mom refers to with Martin Luther King, with Mandela, with Gandhi, were about, on the one hand, peaceful mass protest movements, and on the other hand, threatening capital with violence. That if you carry on like this, you won't have capitalism anymore because we'll destroy your factories. And between these two wings, which are really on the same side, we have this whole range of tactics that should allow us a kind of sliding scale of involvement. There are people who give up meat, and then there are people who go out and march, and then people who block the streets. And we need them all. We need a mass movement which is in solidarity against capital. What we don't need is to fight each other about these tactics. We need to agree that the enemy is capital, and we all have our own way. Perhaps some people chuck in a few hundred quid, and other people are putting their bodies on the line and willing. I mean, there are people in Egypt, you know, the guy that's starving and has stopped drinking is willing to die. Okay, I'm not yet quite there, but there are things I can do still, and I hope there are things that my family will do, my kids and grandkids will do, as they become more conscious of the things that they can do. You know, my daughter is at the moment feeding her baby, a tiny baby, and there's a limit to what she can do.
Lucy?
I don't know how constructive it is to say this, but because we're so largely city dwellers, I think people have, yes, air pollution they're aware of, but I don't think, I mean, we're at this extraordinary conjuncture where all these things are kind of coming together. At the moment, we're in Wales, in a very remote bit of Wales. And last night, I saw a fly in the bathroom. This morning, I saw that fly again. A fly in the house is now an event. There are very, very few flies. There are also very few spiders because spiders eat the flies. There are therefore very, very few birds because many of the birds eat flies. This is all coming together in a way which people in cities are very unaware of. If you put the word fly into a search engine, what you get is a host of products to kill flies. If you put the word rat or mouse into a search engine, ditto, you get a host of products and people who will come and exterminate. We're killing the world. We're killing the world.
Sue.
Thank you. Thanks all for your talks. And I wanted to just come back to something that Julian mentioned, which was a critique of postmodernism, which I completely agree with. I think in universities where I've spent most of my working life, there's a very dark side, which we know in terms of the kinds of research that's done into oil as well as into tobacco and so many other things, nuclear power and so on. And a lot of climate research has come out of the military, particularly in the US. I've been on the fringes of academia, really, and I've worked more with academic activists, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And it's always a struggle to address academic form, because the idea that you might bring emotion into teaching or selecting your research or responding to research is generally frowned upon. I'm thinking of Howard Zinn, who I always really enjoyed to read as a historian. And he wrote, if you don't speak out, then you are on the side of the oppressors. And I think that's very important to remember. But I'm really heartened by the number of scientists who are now coming out and putting their bodies on the line. So on Twitter, there's a constant thread of climate scientists who are now going out to protests and speaking out, probably at some risk to themselves and their jobs, and of course doctors and medics who are scientists in their own right. So I kind of have hope that that is making a contribution, and that in academia there's more of a leakage between activism and academic life.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old, and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. But I wish you would direct all that anger and hatred at our government. They are betraying young people like me. I would love to be there if they did their lawful duty to their own citizens. I'm part of the Just Stop Oil Coalition, demanding an end to all new oil and gas licenses in the UK. What we're asking for is what all the scientists are asking for, what the United Nations are asking for, the International Energy, the IPCC. How many more people have to say, we don't have a livable future if you continue licensing oil and gas for you to listen? Why does it take young people like me up on a fucking gantry on the M25 for you to listen? Over 1,000 people in the UK died in just a few days because of the 40-degree heat, because of the climate crisis, which is fueled by oil, gas, coal, fossil fuels. And our government, they want more. It is an act of murder. And this is an act of self-defense. And we need you to join us in order for this to work, in order for our murderous government to take action and listen. How many more people in Pakistan, in Nigeria have to die before they listen, even in the UK? We will stop as soon as the government stop new oil and gas. Please join us. Civil resistance is all we have left. The police are now here. And they're closing off the road.
Well, listening to that young woman, I've heard it several times before, I kind of feel just because somebody's very impassioned, it doesn't mean that they're right. And that's a problem for us. We have to take into account the fact that some people listening to her will just think, hysterical, silly girl. What's she doing up there? She should be studying or whatever. The fact that she says it and she's got tears in her voice doesn't necessarily make it conclusive, does it? I was one of those who said yes to blocking traffic in central London in comparison with the impact of what we're seeing happening, the destruction of the environment and everything. People having to wait in a traffic jam for a few hours is completely irrelevant. So I mean, if it does make people sit up and take notice, good. What I'm a bit worried about is that it's sort of unfocused. I mean, the question of what Palestine Action do is controversial within the Palestine Solidarity movement. There are some people who say, oh no, it makes people think we're irresponsible, we shouldn't be doing it for that reason. I don't buy that argument. And the reason I personally support what Palestine Action do is because they have a very clear target. Elbit Systems is engaged in producing weapons of murder, weapons of destruction, and they are trying to stop it. It's very, very clear. There have been people on the news recently from Greenham Common, women saying, we went and camped out in Greenham Common for years in some cases, and we're supporting these young people because this is the sort of thing you have to do if you have a particular target in view, and theirs was the sighting of nuclear weapons on British soil. And so I don't think there's much point just being obstructive and saying, I'm doing this to make you all sit up and take notice. Well, take notice of what? How are we supposed to move on from there? And we all have different roles, don't we? So, for example, we know that police action against these kind of protests is going to get more and more heavy-handed, more and more authoritarian. There need to be people who don't go to jail, but who are out there campaigning on the question of the right to protest. We all have our different roles to play. I'm not trying to be at all negative about XR, because I think it has generated a lot of important thinking and discussion. And in fact, the Palestine Action people are, some of them come out of XR, that they are young people who are combining the struggles that they care about. So this is all good. But I think we as seasoned activists, and we all are in various ways, we've got to think, what is our role? Yes, and being old, people said it at the JVL AGM, for those of you who were there, being old and a bit doddery looking and probably less likely to get beaten over the head by an irate cop gives us an advantage in terms of going out on the streets, and good for Tony. But then there are lots of other things that we're good at and have experience at and should be doing to support the right of people to protest over these issues.
Thanks very much, Naomi. When other people have spoken, I'd like to come back to the idea of emotion.
Yes, sharing very much Naomi's kind of responses, I think. I've been involved in red-green politics for over 30 years. And the overwhelming feeling I have is the impossibility of the task. Let's be quite clear about it. I'm not underestimating the crisis at all. I think, in many ways, I think it has escaped us. And when we had time, we couldn't get anyone to pay any attention. Maybe we went about it the wrong way. From my own experience, it's not a case of people who are in denial. It's more a case of knowing and not knowing at the same time. I feel that very much about meat eating. I just do not know why I do it, but by God, I still do it less frequently, less avidly, organic where possible, etc. That is one's ability to live with contradictions, I think, is very, very high, and to bring to the front the particular issues and concerns you have at the time, even though the world is burning around you. There's I've got to get something up on the website by tomorrow, I've got to do something else, etc. And it's how collectively one can get a sense of sharing the tasks rather than kind of feeling you're making an individual choice and, well, I'm prioritizing this, and is it because I'm scared of being arrested? Partly, I don't kind of quite feel safe being thrown around by the police as I might have 60 years ago. Those kind of things, and have that kind of discussion and feel that the different levels of input are all part of the same. So I don't like the feeling of being, let's be blunt about it, emotionally blackmailed because I'm not doing something. And in some of the voices you hear, I have that feeling, and it doesn't work for me, or my response is to do something else, which I think is contributing to the struggle in my way, none of which is adequate. I have no idea whether blocking the road, I support people who block the roads. I have no idea whether this is going to actually bring this issue up the agenda. I'm all in favor of people trying and seeing. I fear, as many other people do, that it's merely going to hasten the rightward drift of the state machine and the illegalization of protest. And obviously, we've got to fight against that. Just a whole series of kind of contradictory thoughts I want to throw in. Thanks.
Averil, do you want to?
Yeah, just very quickly to respond to Naomi about there not being focus. The focus was very clearly no new licenses, no new oil and gas licenses, because originally there weren't meant to be any. It would be against the law, actually, and the government has recently made clear that there are about 130 or so new licenses due in the next 3 years. That's it, so it's really very limited, and it's the same demand as has come out of the United Nations, as has come out of, I can't remember one of the energy commissions, various scientists. I mean, there's several august and bodies have said, you know, we've got to stop new drilling. So that was very clear. It was clear in the response in the media and other people that didn't necessarily come across. I suppose if you just say just stop oil, it got interpreted in different ways, and it perhaps should have said just stop new oil. But there was a very simple demand.
Lucy, would you like to say something?
We have to remember that what we're getting as the result of these protests is generally filtered through our mass media.
Yeah.
They're telling us that it isn't working. They're telling us that it's pointless and that it's upsetting people. It seems to me actually that a lot of people have heard what the Just Stop Oil protesters have said. They've said it in remarkably articulate ways. I think they're being remarkably successful. Richard may well be right that it will just provide authoritarian ways of controlling us. But I don't think they've been as unsuccessful as people have tried to make out. And I think that yes, throwing the soup at the painting was a ghastly thing to do, but they did. As Tony had said at the beginning, the woman who did it did explain in a very articulate way why it's great. It's great. Somebody wanted me to explain where I'm coming from. In what sense I'm coming from? I joined Just Stop Oil, but have in fact not actually gone on any protests, which is kind of feeble-minded of me. But I got myself trained in non-violent protest, which was extremely good training. I thought it was terrific.
I wanted to say to Richard that I think that's exactly what denial looks like. It's both knowing and not knowing something at the same time. So, you know, and it's not at one level. Denial has many levels. And I think so there is a sense, that's why I describe it as a portal. I think for some people, I think like that young woman on the gantry, you've broken through, and then your life has changed immeasurably. And like young people saying to me, I can't possibly have children. It's a huge change that. And I mean, I was thinking in my analogy with breaking glass, you know, the breakthrough, the breaking through away from denial has a very harsh look to it. And when I'll just read you this little bit, which is the woman's Sylvia tries to tell her husband what she's feeling, and he says, what's this tone of voice? And she says, it's a Jewish woman's tone of voice. What are you talking about? Are you crazy? Don't you call me crazy, Philip. I'm talking about it. They're smashing windows and beating children. I'm talking about it. I'm talking about it, Philip. Okay. A lot of people have said to women over the last 50 years that when they talk about it, when they break through, when they go through the portal, that they're, what was the phrase used? That they're hysterical, silly girls. I think we've got to face up to the emotion that that mass extinction, that the sixth mass extinction will engender in people. It's not going to be easy to face that emotion. Carol, it'd be lovely to hear from you.
It's me, I'm sorry. I'm Eva Turner, I don't know.
Hiya, sorry, say your name again.
Eva Turner.
Okay, lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I have, thank you, Tony, for bringing the gender aspect. Can you hear me? I said, thank you, Tony, for bringing in the gender aspects of this. It is very important that we do not call emotion as a reason for not doing something. I think that's important. I also think that the young woman, we need to look around. I think there are a number of young people as well as oldies who are seeing the future in very, very black colors, because the politicians are not doing anything. And because of that, direct action may be the only weapon we have to actually deal with it, which does not prevent us to join what hopefully has to become a movement to stop the current government introducing completely anti-democratic laws. And that's that they go hand in hand, and the direct action will have to be used also to stop the government doing anti-democratic laws, introducing. And one of those would be by swamping the laws and the courts with people who are actually willing to be arrested during those actions. So once we have thousands of people arrested during those actions, that impossible law will become clear as being completely unmanageable.
I was just wanting to thank you, Tony, for organising it and for all the contributions. And I'd love for this debate to be a public debate about tactics, because then people wouldn't just see the kind of the events that they get into the press, into the news media, that they'd actually see why people had to make choices and what the options were. It might actually overcome some of people's feeling of powerlessness, being overwhelmed. But there are so many options that people have mentioned, the spectrum of things you can do. And also, I think we need to present the alternative to growth is really to challenge the inequalities that we've already got. So we need to link all that in a public debate. But thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, they had some interesting conversations with police who say, this isn't the right way to go about it. And then you say, well, they say, I agree with you. I mean, this is the police. I'll agree with you, but it's not the right. So then you say, well, what are your suggestions? And then they kind of get stumped because, it's right to your MP. And I said, well, I wonder if you'd like to look through all the letters I've written to it's so easy to say there's another way, but of course, we'd all be doing it another way if we had it.
Thanks, Tony. It was very educational and inspiring for those of us who are sort of still going through the portal.
The one thing we didn't say is it can be very joyful on the other side. I mean, that you can't live without joy. And so whenever you face up to these issues, then you probably have to add extra joy into your life.
Great event, Tony. I think very good discussion. But I found it very thought-provoking and actually quite heartening in the end.
Yes.
Because I ask myself a lot, why I'm not gluing myself to the M25, and I'm very interested in that question of is that what we have to do to be heard? And also the question of overwhelm and denial. Overwhelm, denial, blocking out. I'm very interested in that issue for myself and for the rest of us.
I think one of the best discussions with more ideas in one place than any of the such meetings that I've been to.